Yeah.
Okay, so welcome to our open session. It is organized by SESAC, hosted by Lund University and the Department of Human Geography. We have now, I didn't count, but Monday, so this is the 86th day that we've been active. And this is the third seminar that we have. And the aim of this of SESAC is quite simple. It is to build bridges between Earth observation and the social sciences. So when we arrange these open sessions or webinars, we try to bring in people with a background in some of the kind of challenges and someone with a background in Earth observation, and sometimes both. And today we have Linda Steele, presently in economic history at Lund University, that will represent local perspectives on regional development. We also have Thomas Niedermüssel from Stockholm and Nordregio, that will represent the policy perspective side of it. Thomas has also a long background as a researcher and a bit of insights in Earth observation and applications of Earth observation. And then we also have Sebastian Hafner from RISE, here representing Earth observations, and probably we more than that. I just wanted to say very welcome to you, and the idea is that we start with a presentation from Linda, moving to Thomas, and coming to Sebastian, and then hopefully we have reflections and discussions on exactly what was on the slide before, how we build bridges between Earth observation and the social sciences, and if we should in certain respects. So very welcome, and please go ahead, Linda.
Great. So I need to start with also, I will not say anything about remote sensing. I will, and I hope instead to give you some sort of flavor of what's behind the data. So I will focus on local agency, local actors, initiatives towards regional development, and what is the people's perspective on the data that we can see in the quantitatives. I also want to say that I'm not a football fan. This is part of a bet, so that's why I wear this today. So the research I'll present is comes from two different projects, both studying agency in the Nordics and in different regions in Europe. And it started from the perspective of that we know that regions perform differently, labor market regions. We expect them to perform in a certain way based on what we know of structural preconditions, but there are large deviations. They are large, they're systematic, and they're robust, and they appear across regional type and across time. So in the regrow project, we want to figure out why. And if you want to know more about the statistics of this, Mikhail is here, so then you ask questions to him instead. I would like to talk about human agency. And for those who are not familiar with human agency, it's about the intentional, purposive, and meaningful actions and the intended and unintended consequences of such actions. So we're interested about what people do and what the consequences are of their actions. And we also see people's ability to take actions based on or shaped by their past experience, the present situation, and their expectations of the future. We look at agency in two different ways. It's about change agency, where we look at three different ways of changing the local conditions, starting new industry paths, etc. But then there is also a lot of agency expressions that are not at all about creating change, but it's about maybe resisting change or stabilizing the current, or maybe not acting because you cannot really see that you have the agency to do anything. I looked at this in 3 different old industrial regions, 3 cases that have gone through crisis or structural change. Olofström was quite recently, 2008, in Kiruna and Borås. It was back in the 70s or so. All these cases have developed. They have upgraded from their traditional industrial path. Kiruna and Borås have also diversified. In Borås, they've really diversified. There was the textile production all moved away, but based on skills and competences and resources, they have diversified into completely new industries. And looking at these individual cases, I think some key conclusions are that old industrial regions, we often talk about them like they're the same, but they're also very different. I could conclude that change agency is found in all of these cases, that different actors can drive change. So it's not always the same. It could be a politician, it could be a firm, it could be the civil society. Who it is depends on, for example, the local culture, the organization of industry and jurisdiction. The responses to crisis, they can be instant, they can brew slow. Here it's then important to really understand that change takes time. And for this, you need patience, you need persistence, and this might be difficult for example, local politicians who needs to win the next election and so on. But after the project, we focused more on cross-case analysis. So all of these individual detailed cases, what can we learn from them? And one recent paper there is looking at the municipalities and what can they actually do for regional development. Although when we talk about regional development, the responsibility for working with that and the funds for doing that is not on the municipal level. But we also know that municipalities, they're actually the front line of regional development. That's where jobs get lost or new industries grow, etc. So based on literature, we could conclude that there are, depending on how a municipality is embedded regionally, nationally, we could expect that this influences their agency in some way. It's about the regulation of mandate, access to funding, supporting policy programs, for example, on the national level, and actor composition, power relations, and informal institutions on the regional level. And we looked at 3 types of regions: small peripheral regions, entrepreneurial regions, and regional centers. So these are labor market regions consisting of 1 to 5 different municipalities. So what could we then say about the patterns of agency here? Well, first we can say that yes, like I said before, there are change agency activities in all cases, but if we look at the municipal actions more in detail.
Morgonen och förmiddagen vet att vi har pratat om detta med anledning av en ny rapport ifrån
What is this? Okay, that was not me. Good. In smaller regional municipalities, they act more in episodes, episodic engagement. In entrepreneurial regions, the firms usually take the lead and the municipalities act more supportive. In regional centers that have so much more resources, diversified types of actors, municipalities can work more systematic on promoting regional development. And what is it that we need to learn from this? Well, it is that one size does not fit all. The municipalities that we have in Sweden and in the Nordics, they have very different prerequisites for working with regional development. So we cannot expect them to do the same, and we need to adapt policy to that. Maybe Thomas will say something about that later. Another difference that we saw was when we look at more time differences. So this is a classic graph by Simin Martin, and how the gray line is how an industry grows, and the black line is how the resilience of a region declines as the industry path develops. And when the industry is at its top, then resilience is usually low. And we looked into small places that have large firms, but how does their agency patterns look? And here we can conclude that in the beginning, in the restructuring phase, the reorganization phase, there we see change agency. Here we're talking not just about municipal actors, but all types of local actors. But then as an industry starts growing, everybody starts working more reproductively. They want to support what's good and help that grow. And in that process, you kind of lose thinking about the decline and release phase that would come at some point. Usually an industry path declines at some point. But what we see is that in small places, there's less capability of actually looking ahead and preparing for this. And what you would actually maybe want is to have a change agency work that starts when you're at the peak of an industry. That's the time when you, as local actors, need to look at what's the next thing. How can we prepare for a decline or a crisis that most likely will come at some point? And I think this is also a very interesting point that we need to think about more when we talk about regional development. So how do we recognize when the time is right to start thinking about something new, and how do you actually do that? How do you pool resources and energy for that? So that's an additional thing that I would want us to think about more in the future. That was what I intended to say. So thank you. And if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to email me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda.
Is it my turn now then? Okay, well, thank you. I've already seen quite a lot of familiar faces, but for those who do not know me, my name is Thomas Niomis, and I work as research director at Nordregio. I have a background in human geography. I've worked at Lund, Uppsala, and Stockholm University, but I've also worked quite a lot with practitioners and policymakers trying to make research relevant for those who make decisions. A brief disclaimer, perhaps. I am not very familiar with satellite data. I have used it, but very little. And my perspective here, or I was sort of asked by Ola to give my reflections on satellite data and those kind of things. And I would like to say that from the start, I think that satellite data has a great potential, but that we have to be a bit creative and in how we use it, how we think about it, and how it can relate to social science more generally, and ensuring that the research we do is policy relevant. But I thought I'd start with the little experience I have in using. See if I can put this down here. Yeah, in using satellite data. And a couple of years ago, or quite some years ago, I did a lot of research on migration. And that might seem like an odd topic to talk about here, but give me a second and I'll explain. When you do research on migration, distance is a key variable. We know that the reasons for moving vary with distance. We also know that the characteristics of movers vary with distance. So it matters a lot if you move within a local housing market, or if you move to a long distance move to another labor market region, etc. The problem is that in general, data on moving distance or migration distance is not available. And that's why migration scholars typically use administrative borders to define migration and use that sort of as a proxy for distance. But we all know the problems with the modifiable area unit problem, ecological fallacy, etc. And most migration researchers are aware that this creates a problem for generalizing research results, in particular across countries. And that is a problem that's been known for almost 150 years. And it's not really been addressed. But that's what we actually set out to do. And let's see if I can. Yeah, and that's where satellite data comes in. We started thinking a bit creatively if we could try to solve this problem using data on nighttime lights. And in Sweden, this problem doesn't really exist because a lot of researchers have access to highly gridded population data. But if we want to compare, for example, research findings from Sweden to other countries, it's no use if they don't have the same type of data. So what we did here was that we tried to calculate the mean center of the population. First, we calculated it using gridded population data, and then we did the same using nighttime lights data. And it turned out that those measures are almost exactly the same. So, and that meant that we can actually use satellite data as a very accurate substitute for gridded population data. And that also allowed us to infer accurate measures of migration distance, aggregate migration distances. So I think that it sort of solves a problem which wasn't available or really that relevant in Sweden, but in all the countries that we wanted to compare with, and for those countries that definitely lack aggregated or disaggregated population data. And so that was a really cool study, I think, that I'm quite happy about. But I think it also shows that you have to be really creative when thinking about how to use satellite data in social science. Now, that's I don't want to talk too much about that. What I want to talk to you about and how to apply this is using my own research institute as an example. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Nordregio, but we're an applied research center focusing on regional development planning and policy. And what we do is that we try to produce policy relevant research, and we do a lot of comparative research in the 5 Nordic countries and the regions Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland. And that's sort of a key feature of what we do. And the reason is that this region is particularly well suited for comparative research. I like to think of it as we're comparing sort of apple varieties, not apples and oranges, because the countries, okay, they're not the same, identical, but the similarities are so obvious and so great that you can almost isolate other factors and focus more on what you're interested in. And that allows spatial differences or whatever differences you identify to be policy relevant and oftentimes meaningful. So that is sort of a key motivation for doing comparative research on the Nordic countries. They are very similar, but they're different enough to make differences relevant. And that also helps transferring policy relevant research or knowledge then. And these are sort of our core research areas. And quite obviously, most of them have a very clear spatial component. So that's why we use a lot of spatial comparisons. We do lots of maps and focus on comparing different types of municipalities, regions, policy areas, etc., very often with a spatial component. And in order to do that, you need to have comparable data. And so we at Nordregio, we manage two major statistical databases. One is the Nordic Statistics database, and the other is the Nordic Health and Welfare Statistics database, the NOSOSCO database. Now, and that is very good. The Nordic region, I would say, is almost ideal for comparative research. However, the problem is that comparable data is not always available. We put a lot of effort into producing comparable data for the Nordic countries and the three regions, but it's quite costly to produce that kind of data. And even if you compare Sweden to, say, Norway, and you're interested in looking at a simple measure such as unemployment rates, you will quite soon discover that they use different types of definitions, etc. And so you have to think hard about, okay, how do we come up with data that is actually comparable and useful? So, and that is why if you go into these databases, you will find that they mainly hold national level data that is comparable. But a lot of research topics that we are interested in addressing require regional or local data or municipality level data, because that's the level where the policymakers' interests usually are. So that is a key problem. We're working to resolve it, but I mean, it will always be quite costly. And so that makes us having to think about alternatives and other opportunities. And when it comes to doing sort of more generally doing territorial research, if you want to compare things, you need four things at the same time. Obviously, you need comparable data, but you also need quite detailed data. And you also want to be able to track things, developments over time, and you need to link them to policy relevant concepts. So I don't think that the problem is that there is a lack of data. There is lots of data, but oftentimes one of these four things or even other more than one thing might be lacking. And then, I mean, the analysis and the feedback you can provide to policymakers will not be as good as it could be. Now, moving briefly then to satellite data. Well, it's not just more data, but one of the things that is really great about satellite data, or where I see the potential, is that it's actually a common measurement infrastructure across borders. So by definition, almost, I guess it's the same. It's the same coverage, the same measurement logic, and it's repeated over time. And if I've understood correctly, I mean, you can get data on almost a daily basis, whereas most of the official statistics we use is annual data, one point in time. But a lot of research questions might be improved by more temporal, by a higher temporal resolution, if that is a correct expression. And also, I mean, satellite data can quite easily be aggregated to the level that policymakers operate at. So, I mean, whereas I'm a geographer, I mean, I'm quite always intrigued and fascinated by high resolution data and think that's really cool and useful. But if you think about policymakers, they're, I mean, not that interested in high resolution data. All they want is perhaps one number for their municipality and their competitors or collaborators. So they may only need one figure for their municipality and being able to compare with their nearest neighbors or regions that are similar to them. Or if you're a minister, you may only want to know, okay, what's the status in Sweden in general? And you want to compare that with, say, Norway to see how we're doing. And that is a great starting point. We, as researchers, we need, of course, more fine-tuned data to be able to explain the problems and hopefully then provide input into solutions, etc. But at the policymaking level, aggregate data is usually fine. And I mean, I think as social scientists, we often forget that. I was at a seminar the other week where there was a Norwegian minister who started his talk by saying something like, well, we weren't really interested in this topic until we understood that Sweden were doing better than us. And then we realized that we had to do something. And I mean, he said that half jokingly, but I mean, comparing at the right level is very important. So satellite data, then, it's not just technically precise, it has to be policy relevant. And yes, and so this is sort of my image of how the link or what the link looks like. So starting out from satellite data, that's just part of the story for making policy relevant analysis. You need some sort of aggregation, making it a territorial indicator of sorts. And then you oftentimes need other types of data, which is usually aggregated into a similar geography. And then you can do the comparative analysis and the policy interpretation. What do the patterns that we see actually mean? So it's not just data and then analysis or policy. There is a lot more to it. And I think there is, looking just from my context and from my research institute, satellite data requires sort of three practical requirements. First of all, we need, I think, to think more about conceptual translation. I'm not sure if that's a good term or something like that, but what I'm trying to say here is that what we need to think more about what satellite measures mean in social science terms. So, for example, built-up surface is not the same as urbanization. We need to talk more about those things, the concepts, so that we understand each other better. And then I think the crucial thing is the geographical linkage. I've already talked a bit about that, but I think that we need to really be careful so that making sure that the indicators we use are connected to the units where policy operates. So very often aggregated into municipalities, regions, or what kind of geography policymakers are interested in. And then we can do further analysis with more high resolution data. And then, of course, validation and context. That is also key, of course. So my point here is that satellite data becomes useful when measurement is translated into social science, meaning in a policy relevant way. And my final note here then is that when preparing for this presentation, I thought that my cue here would be that ideally not what satellites can see, but which comparative questions become more answerable. And I think there are lots of research questions that can be better when we think and learn more about how to use satellite data. But during the day, thinking about it, I think that we also need to think in a quite pragmatic way about this, because let's face it, most social scientists are not aware of the potential of satellite data. So maybe we still have to sort of work to show what satellites actually see to increase the awareness, and that might allow social scientists to see potentials within their fields of interest, and then make it more useful. So I think that's what I wanted to discuss with you, or share some thoughts with you today on satellite data. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Well, let's jump to the answers, Sebastian. Go ahead with your presentation, Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ola. What a nice segue into Digital Earth Sweden. So my name is Sebastian. I'm with RISE, and I'm part of the Space Technology Group at RISE, and we work on Digital Earth Sweden, which is a platform for Earth observation data funded by the Swedish National Space Agency. Yeah, I think some of you are familiar with this image, but basically it shows Earth observation missions developed and operated by the European Space Agency. And as you can see, more and more missions are being developed, and that also means we have more and more Earth observation data. Digital Earth Sweden is a platform that tries to basically make Swedish authorities be able to tap into the potential of Earth observation data. So in the diagram, you can see kind of what we envision the platform to be like. So we collect and refine Earth observation data from different missions, and then we store it on our infrastructure. And then we basically provide tools to not only access the data, but also to work with the data. So to pre-process the data, to analyze the data, and then to also download the data. And the idea is really that Swedish authorities benefit from the huge potential that Earth observation data offers. On top of that, we are also interested in innovation. So we would like to be part of, as part of collaborations, to kind of push the boundaries of what Earth observation data can be used for. So develop new methodologies, but also, for example, new use cases. So now I'm going to talk a bit about what's already available on the platform. So currently we are storing Sentinel-2 data over Sweden. I'll give you a bit of an overview of the Sentinel-2 mission, just for those who are not familiar with it. So it's a European Space Agency mission, which means it's open data. It's a multispectral mission consisting of 2 satellites. 1 pixel in a Sentinel-2 image corresponds to 10 meters on the ground. Because it consists of 2 satellites, that also means we get frequent revisits over the same area. So we have a multispectral instrument with frequent revisits. On the bottom, you can see the spectral signature of vegetation. So that's how vegetation reflects sunlight. And Sentinel-2 has bands, spectral bands, beyond the visible spectrum. So that means we can visualize information that is invisible to our naked eyes. So for example, vegetation reflects much more light in the near infrared spectrum than it does in the visible spectrum. So we can simply visualize the near infrared band in Sentinel-2 as, for example, red, like you can see in the image on the right-hand side, and vegetation becomes very apparent. So multispectral information has a lot of potential for a variety of use cases. So we can really think about how do we leverage that information for different use cases. And then I've already mentioned the temporary visits. So we have sub-weekly revisit frequency. So that means every week we get an image, given that there's no clouds. So in some areas, obviously, there's a lot of clouds, so then we don't always see the Earth's surface. But in general, we can use Sentinel-2 to monitor the Earth's surface. So for example, here you see a time series over an urban area, and you can kind of see how urban areas are growing. So Sentinel-2 is also great for monitoring applications. So now that you have a bit of an idea about Sentinel-2, which is the data that we are storing and that you can work with on Digital Earth Sweden, yeah, I'll show you a bit what you can do with the platform. Before that, the cool thing about the platform is it's already available today. So it's free to use, anyone can use it. The focus area is really Sweden and its surrounding areas. So unfortunately, we are not really crossing the borders that Thomas mentioned. But yeah, we have a large archive over Sweden that dates back to, I think, 2015. So we can really do temporal analysis. Here you can see the graphical interface of Digital Earth Sweden. So the URL is digitalearth.se, and then you get to our landing page. From there, you find a lot of different resources. You can click on Kom igång, and then you see you can visualize our data. You have a map service where you can explore the data, and then also resources like tutorials, how to get started with the platform, and so on. Here you can see the visual explorer that we have for Sentinel-2 imagery. So basically you can click on any area in Sweden, and then what we do is we filter the data to all of the Sentinel-2 images that have been acquired over that specific area, and then you can visualize single scenes. This is a great first step to do to see whether what you're interested in is actually visible or apparent in the images. And then you can also, if you're interested in changes over time, you can, for example, visualize different images, for example, one in 2019 and then one more recent one, and you can see whether the changes are apparent in the imagery. On top of that, we have an API, so a programming interface. So you can basically access the data programmatically and then work with the data. So our API basically allows you to create workflows, so to implement pre-processing, to implement analysis workflows, and then to also download the data. So here it's important that all of the, let's say, heavy computation parts, you can outsource them to the platform. So with the API, you can run all the pre-processing, all the analysis on the platform. So you don't have to download any of the data to your own local machine. You run everything there. And then what you're downloading is only the final product. So that's great if you want to look at larger areas, if you want to scale things and so on. So now I'm just going to give you a very quick impression of the API. So basically here I'm using Python in a Jupyter notebook, and I simply pip install the OpenEO library, and then it's 3 lines of code to connect to our backend. And then I'm listing all of the data collections that are available on the platform. And then what I'm doing is I'm loading the data over a specific area. So in the area of interest, I'm defining the extent of my area. Then I'm defining the time span. So I'm loading all of the images acquired during that time span. And then I'm creating a data cube. So our data cube is 4-dimensional. We have our time dimensions. So those are all of the acquisitions acquired during the time span. We have our spatial dimensions, so over our area of interest. And then we have the different spectral bands of Sentinel-2. So it's very few lines of codes, and we already have the data in a representation that allows us to perform analysis. Then one simple thing I can do is I can simply select a single band. So here I'm selecting the red band, band 4 in Sentinel-2, and I'm downloading it. So then it ends up in the local memory of my computer. But then obviously I would like to work with the data. So here I'm looking at the spectral index, the normalized difference vegetation index, which is very common in remote sensing. So basically we're using band combinations. We're comparing two spectral bands to highlight features like here vegetation. And you can see I can use Python's native operators, so in this case minus and the division operator, to simply implement the formula of NDVI. So first I select the bands and then I implement the formula, and then I'm computing NDVI basically on our infrastructure, and I can download the resulting output. And what I get is a map of NDVI over Karlstad in this case, and all the green areas, those are vegetated areas, and then the red areas are non-vegetated areas. So with very few lines of code, I can already kind of create insights. I can also do temporal reduction. So for example, if I have an area that is cloudy, I can use multi-temporal images to create one cloud-free image. So this is what I'm doing here. Here you can see over Karlstad, I created a cloud-free image. And then Thomas also mentioned that it's typically important to get from the images to an aggregated product. So for example, statistics over an area. And this is also what I can do using our API. So here I could compute, let's say, the mean greenness over my area. And the same way as we did the temporal reduction, it's basically a single line of code that I can that I use to do that. So it's fairly easy to work with Earth observation data using the API. Yeah, before I conclude that part, I mean, now there was a very quick and brief introduction to the API, but we have detailed tutorials basically on our GitHub repository that you can find on our webpage. And there we have a lot of tutorials that really walk you through different workflows and that show you how to implement them. And then you can basically use them as a template and adopt them or adapt them to your use case. Yeah, now I'll use a bit of time to talk about what we're currently working. So with the Sentinel-2 product that you can get from Copernicus, there you have some artifacts. So for example, here on the right-hand side, you can see the Copernicus Sentinel-2 product, and you can see there's some artifacts along edges of individual tiles. And we developed basically a pipeline that produces a better product, which you can see on the left-hand side. So there we don't have any artifact. It's more consistent also across time. And that product is really adapted to Sweden. And that's only available on the platform. And the pipeline is now up and running. So that data is becoming available now. Then we're also looking into having Sentinel-1 data on the platform. So Sentinel-1 is an active system, so a synthetic aperture radar satellite mission that sends out a signal, and then it records the backscattering of that signal. So it's sensitive to, let's say, vertical or the geometry of features on the ground. And the great thing is it sees through clouds, so it's not affected by atmospheric conditions. Yeah, that was a very brief overview of Digital Earth Sweden. I included the QR code here that leads you to our website, digitalearth.se, and all of the resources are available there. I think that being said, we are very much interested at the moment in developing use cases, so kind of in enabling the bridges that Ola mentioned, so providing the data and also collaborating with you on how to kind of develop use cases on top of the platform. Yeah, with that, I'm closing.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Very interesting. So now we have a little bit of time left for questions, reflections.
I have a reflection following. Sorry, Hamid.
Go on, please.
No, but it's like, so I also come from a background in GIS and spatial data, but to me, one of the puzzles is to answer some of the why questions that we have in social science. So with the data, spatial or just quant, I can learn some things about when and where and how, but then there is an additional layer of why that sometimes is not visible in the data, like in the agency example that I showed you. And I think to me, that's still a bit of a puzzle of how to really integrate that. So it's good that we discuss it. But otherwise, I would also highlight then the project where we started with the quant part, and then we collaborated, or they collaborated with researchers looking at the same thing, but from a different perspective, that could also be one way forward.
Yeah, my question is a little technical of Sebastian. I think you were presenting the Digital Earth Sweden. Do we need any credentials? Like, do we need like username, password to access this data? Is the API available for the public, or?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. It's public, basically. Everything is public. So we have a user account that we are distributing. So it's simply test user, and the password is secret password. And anyone can use that one, basically, and access the data and use, like, run things on our infrastructure. Yeah.
And the second part of my question is that I guess the data is only related to Sweden, or is there like any other regions available?
It's Sweden and a bit of the surrounding areas, but the primary focus is really Sweden.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I have another question, maybe based on what Thomas said and what Sebastian said. Imagine you have a sample from which you can calculate total numbers of people, like, let's say, ambient population. Could I use the remote sensing data to calibrate it to actual population, given that ambient population does not really fit the register data? Because we are not where we are supposed to be registered, especially during daytime. I'm not sure there is an answer, it's just that. Yeah.
I don't know who wants to give that. I want to try. I think we also have a Linda's why question here. But I mean, ambient population is, you're from the cell phone business, Marina. Isn't that a better option?
Yeah, so my question was basically like, if you have a subsample of a population, like in our data, we have 10-15%, and you want to turn it to an actual numbers. So like what is normally done, you look at night, you look at what register data says and kind of proportionally, but I'm not sure I would, trust this really. I'm wondering if we can think of a better way.
Well, let's see if we can.
Just a reflection on that. I mean, you can, of course, it will only help us a small part of this population, but you can look at cars, for example. I mean, are they in the same place? If they're not, if they're on a road, there's probably people in them. So thinking about those kind of things, congestion, for example, but might be possible to study looking at the number of cars on roads and spacing, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking more along the accessibility thing. I think the data you mentioned, Sebastian, was from Sentinel-2, right? Which I think is part of the Copernicus suite. So that's basically ESA, so it should be public domain, right? But yeah. I was going to ask, like, all of you who use satellite data, where does your data come from? Are you only using open source data, or are you buying data, or So more general question about the access to the data, or where the data is coming from.
I can give you some insight because I've been spending some time on that question quite recently, because I have seen a pattern over the last couple of years where it started out with an increase of data providers globally. Some prominent countries has been North America, Europe, India, for example, had their own satellites. And companies were formed when there was a transfer from national initiative to private ones. So I think around 2021 there were close to 1,000 companies globally that could deliver commercial data. They kept on calling us all day long and want to sell their data. Now we experience something quite different. No one is calling anymore. Sounds a little bit sad, but that's the truth. And I think the reason is that most companies are now moving into intelligence. They have data and they want to produce intelligence. And this is, of course, something that align with AI and the potential of creating systems in a different way. So try to get data from Planet or ISI or these companies. You can get it sometimes for certain applications. But if you ask for some applications that you want to do, then they say no, because they already have something ready that they're selling to nations and to other companies. Or so I think it's I don't know if Eric, if that's answering your question, but it seems like we always end up with the open access data, and that has to do, Sebastian, you know more about this, but it also has to do that this kind of medium resolution data, 10, 20 meters, has a full global coverage. It's a reasonable high temporal frequency, while the more detailed data that most people have in front of their eyes, thinking of remote sensing these days, is much more local. There's usually no archives of any depth to work with. So I think we end up with the old kind of workhorses, which is Landsat and Sentinel data.
Thanks. Do you see any trend in terms of like countries being more secretive with the data, considering the global situation, or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I saw that Hans Hauska, are you still here? Because Hans has been in this business for 45 to 50 years.
Okay, I'm here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have not unmuted. I just would like to make a comment. That's why I set up my hand. I would like to make a comment there. The best, unless you want to have pre-processed data or data that are used by some or sold by some company for a lot of money, with some so-called artificial intelligence added or not, where I think that the intelligence is not the important thing, because if you have a problem and you know how you want to solve it, you want to do that yourself, not based on somebody else's results, which you do not necessarily see through how they are done. So you have the prime producers, which are very simple. One is you go online to make yourself a user in the Competence project. And then you can, free of charge, download all the data you need that you can get through ESA. Another one is you go to NASA. There you can also make yourself a user and you can download US satellites data, anything that is freely available. Problem is you have to do some processing yourself. If you want to have pre-processed, like geometrically corrected data or something like that, that may be a problem. But the downloading and acquiring data is actually very easy these days. The only thing you have to do is you have to regularly log in to, for instance, ESA or somewhere else, because otherwise they think you are not a customer any longer, not interested, and they will close down your account. That's what I had to say.
Yeah, great comment. Thank you. Linda, let's return to your question because that is the tricky one. And I think it's the key one because remote sensing data, as we know, can tell us a lot about where, and it can also tell us a lot about what. For example, buildings, there are additional buildings, new infrastructure, and things like that. But explaining the things that social scientists are interested in is a little bit more tricky. My view on that is that we need to combine the two worlds, which is basically, I mean, your research is the combination of quantitative research and in combination with field visits and qualitative work. I think that is the key, to bring them together. Use the satellite data for what it's good for, and then combine it with the why questions that are usually solved by, that could be the register data, but that could also be by interviewing people on the ground, surveys and that kind of stuff. I think that is the key for all our disciplines. Easier said than done.
May I add to Ula's comment also?
Yes, sure, Hans.
I think what can be used if you have an urban area somewhere, and you have like for small sub areas, you have exact population data. You can take those, and then you can look at the type of what type of housing is there. Is it villas or is it? And then from the data that you have, which may give you an opinion about how many people you can find in 20 villas, you can maybe extract and interpolate and assume that you get close to the truth. But you will have difficulties getting to the real truth. But you can do good estimates that can bring you further. And once you've realized that, okay, this is as far as I can go, you have to put on your shoes and your coat, and you go around and ask the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Tilly?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Sebastian, Linda, and Thomas. Very interesting mix of presentations, of course. And also a very important question, Linda. I'm curious about how you would answer that, Thomas, in your work. How do you work with the why at Nordregio?
Yeah, well, I agree. That's of course the key issue, and I mean that's where you usually start out. But the way, if we're just trying to focus on satellite data, I mean, I think that social scientists need to be aware of the data that is available. That's also a starting point to be able to ask the correct why questions. I mean, because we want answers to those questions, and then we sort of look, okay, what kind of data is available? And I think that to a large extent, satellite data and all of that is a bit too technical. We don't see the sort of the good examples for how it can be used to answer the why questions. We need more good, inspiring examples, I think. Yeah, that would be my take, because let's face it, I don't think that many social scientists use satellite data. We haven't seen that many studies, but maybe that's about to change.
Yeah.
May I make a little impasse here? Because there's a lot of literature. I mean, remote sensing people have published for the last, I've been in this game for a little bit more than like 53 years. And during that time, a flood of publications had been done, and you can find all kinds of things. But okay, for some purposes, for social science people, it may be very difficult. But for other people, you can, for instance, look at the waters around a large city, and by analyzing the water with the color or the constituency of it, whatever you need, and together with some colleagues from the science who deal with water, you may find out there's a lot of water around here that will poison the whole population. Is that interesting for you as a social scientist? I think yes, but maybe you have a different opinion. Okay, so I don't think remote sensing is of no interest for you, but you have to come down to specific questions where it can assist you in your main quest. Thanks. Sorry, I talked too much.
Oh, no, it's good to have you here, Hans. I'm posting some scoping reviews that will come. Now I got a chance to do a little bit of a commercial too. I'm trying to post something on causality and remote sensing, because there's a lot of work in that, of course, in relation to machine learning and things like that. So that is the machine learning is probably the emperor's new clothing, but there are some work on that side.
No, the machine learning as such is not the emperor's new clothing. It's the artificial intelligence that's the emperor's new clothing.
Yeah, probably. So now we are a bit overdue. Linda, that is one of the things that we're going to work on, of course. We will keep you posted. I think, Tilly, that we should conclude. What's in the pipeline? Soon there is a little bit of a summer vacation, but then there will be a lot of more things coming your way. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna send out a newsletter, not too long, but there are some things coming up. We have a community survey for SESAC. We want to learn what you want us to work with, so we are not alone in our brains here. But we will also have a horizon scan on the future of social science questions and satellite data and Earth observation, which is a collaborative process, which we hope to, in the end, maybe have a publication on. But more importantly, to bridge between practice and research more, because we think that is the way forward to stay relevant to society and societal change. I think, Nordics, you already know this, but I think we want to at least have that part of our process here at SESAC. Yeah, and I know at Digital Earth you will have a hackathon coming up soon. We're hoping to have something similar. We call it a challenge, but we will have something similar in the fall. Feel free to advertise your hackathon now if you want to, or else you can just look it up. But I'm very happy that you could come here. We would like to talk to you at Digital Earth as well. It's very cool that we are a few players now here in Sweden that is actually being interested in this field a little bit more across generations.
Yeah, and also, Linda, now when you are open as a postdoc for doing new things, there will be training coming your way, SESAC training, scheduled for September. The exact dates will come out. There will be 2 versions of it, then that is a good preparation for the challenge that will come in the end of November. So. And in between, there will be more things happening, but those are the bigger things that we have planned so far.
Yeah, and I'm starting a PhD now in September also, and I'm looking into this as well, the why and the satellite questions. Perhaps we'll see, but
great.
Yeah.
So everyone, thank you so much. Thomas, Sebastian, Linda for the presentations, and thank you guys for participating. Good to see some of the new faces here too. Take care and have a great weekend.